My name is Linda Douglas, by the way. I'll introduce myself again, just, just in case you didn't hear it the first time. And I'm a member of the Council for Responsible Social Media, which I have to say, since joining, is such an impressive group of experts, people who've been devoting their lives to trying to make the social media platforms safer and both safer and less harmful. And one of the things we're going to be focusing on the most is the fallout, if there was some, and I bet there was, from last week's hearing, which I'm imagining many of you saw because it was the lead story on all the networks. It was the front pages of all the papers, all those old-fashioned mainstream ways of getting your news. It also got a tremendous amount of social media. It was quite the event. So we just want to wait another minute or so until you all get settled, and I hope that by the end of our conversation, we're going to know a couple of things that are important. Number one, this is really hard to get done because they've got an army of lobbyists blocking any change. So this is a very tough fight. And number two, our resolve and our strength and our knowledge and our influence and impact at this point in the process are far greater, I think, than they have been. So, that is our hope and our goal. So I think we'll go ahead and get started, and I'm going to interview our panelists and introduce them to you. Again, I'm Linda Douglas, and this is the first time that our two experts here have appeared together. So you're really being treated to a special event. The experts we have are the two now famous Meta whistleblowers, Arturo Bejar, Frances Haugen. Both of them deeply familiar with how these platforms work and with the harm that they were causing children. Frances was the one who really blew the whistle and blew the lid off of all of this. Arturo was the executive in charge of all the safety issues for Meta, and then came back as a consultant. So they're really knowledgeable. And we just want to say to you before we start, to the two of you, that being a whistleblower is a very difficult thing. You do it at huge personal sacrifice. It is a lonely road. You lose your friends. You often lose your ability to work in your field. So we're all grateful to you for this. And we think your revelations have brought us closer to holding the tech companies accountable. So with that,
Linda, can I interrupt you really quickly? I want to toot Arturo's horn just a smidge more, which is, yes, he founded a lot of these teams. But when I came forward and he saw that the executives were lying, he did a number of very intentional actions. He made sure that the findings he found were documented. He made sure there was a paper trail that the executives knew about them. And he made sure that history was not lost. And we need to acknowledge how significant that is, because it's part of the core of the AG's case. So I just can't let that disappear into the ether.
Both of you have really changed the political landscape around this. So let's just start with kind of an overview of that incredibly dramatic hearing with the 5 tech CEOs. So what was your initial reaction, and what stood out to you? And Frances, why don't we start with you?
So I got to attend, I had the privilege of getting to attend the hearing in person. And I was not aware before I walked in that I knew there were going to be parents of children who had been harmed, who had lost children. I did not know how many there would be. And I didn't know that they were going to take such an active role in the hearing. So when I walked in, at first I was confused because there are all these people with their hands above their heads. And, being the millennial that I am, I was like, oh, they must be filming the executives coming in on their tablets. Like, that must be what they're doing. And then I realized, fortunately, before I held up my phone to do the same, that they were actually photos of children they had lost. So the tone of the hearing coming in was more charged than anything I've ever personally witnessed in Congress. Forcing both the senators and the executives to confront the huge human cost of the negligence that has taken place on these systems. And that tone carried forward through the rest of the hearing. So in a best case scenario in a hearing like this, senators really take up the mantle of using their bully pulpit, of refusing to accept sound bites. And I think because the senators had to face down those parents much more than even the executives did. Remember, the executives were facing away from the parents. They could feel them, they could hear them, they could hear them hissing like when they'd say bad things. But the senators had to look at those parents. And I'm really, really proud of Congress. Both the Republicans and the Democrats are standing up and demanding more and making sure that every moment that could get extracted from that hearing did, including the apology from Mark Zuckerberg.
You're right. It was so emotional. And how about you, Arturo? So what really stood out to you?
So to me, the it was really all about the parents, as Francis said, and to see them there, and to see, to me, what crystallized the role that Meta and the other CEOs were taking there was to have Mark lead in his opening statement about like, well, the sense still not definitive about like the role of mental health, where there's like so many proof points sitting next to him, and also how disrespectful to every parent to say, well, the jury's still out, as they hold pictures of the children they have lost, right? And at the same time, I found it so encouraging to see Republicans and Democrats asking questions that got really like to the places that need to be talking about, and everybody holding them to account evenly. I remember when I did my own testimony, as I walked out, the clerk at the entrance said, "Well, I've never seen that. I've never seen all of them agrees on anything." And I think that's what we saw. And so it's a very special moment where it'll be hard to get legislation over. But I do, like, everybody should know we're never going to have a moment like this again, where the amount of visibility that we have in how they make decisions, thanks to Francis, who just with so much courage put everything out there and began all of these conversations. But within the AGs and everything that they're bringing to light of Meta's own documentation on all of these issues, the stuff that I got to bring into the light, the emails that Blumenthal released in the morning, we're getting the best picture we will ever have about how companies care about harm of the teens that use their products, which is they don't. And so this is the time to really put everything you can into trying to make this legislation happen.
Well, now you both, because this conversation is very much about trust. I mean, that is the title of this conversation. Should we trust what happened there, what they said? So both of you have experience with providing concerns and solutions and getting reactions of reforms. Zuckerberg said, what, $20 billion, and thousands of safety employees are going to be employed to make social media safer for children. The company puts out a statement all the time that they've provided 30 tools to give parents more control over what their kids are seeing. So, first of all, have these reforms made a difference? Secondly, this is a three-part question. Do you trust them to do more? And third, if you don't trust them, why don't you? Why don't we start with you, Arturo?
Yeah. So they've been talking about the $20 billion and 40,000 people and 30 tools for as long as I can remember. So this is not a new commitment. And when I was working on the inside and I was seeing Mark get in front and testify saying, using this word prevalence, which should be a red flag for anybody who hears it, that says, the prevalence of bullying and harassment at the time of Instagram, when it was like 0.08%, for example. And I think that is intended to make parents feel that it's not so bad, that there's not an issue. Whereas the truth and the numbers that were studied and put in front of him was like 1 in 10 kids in the last 7 days got bullied and harassed. Half of them did not at all feel supported when they had to deal with it. And a quarter of the kids watched it happening, which normalizes bullying and harassment behavior in front of multiple parents whose kids took their own lives because they got to a point in bullying and harassment that they had passed away. So in the way that the company talks about these tools, right? And I've been talking about unwanted advances, they don't address the harms that they know teens are experiencing on their platform, right? The 1 in 8 in the last 7 days. These are all things that have not been worked on. And when Nick Clegg asked Mark Zuckerberg for 84 engineers out of 35,000 to make well-being better, which included addiction, self-harm, content, suicide prevention, and bullying and harassment, Mark said no, because I think ultimately they're investing in things that make the company look better, but don't substantially address the issues. And so I don't trust them, because the right thing to do in the room of parents is to turn around and sit down with those parents and understand the experience that their kids had, and then figure out what you have to change in the product in order for that to not happen again. And it's a very workable process. They have the tools to do it, but instead they just double down on their narrative.
How about you, Francis? Did you trust their pledges? And if not, why not?
So the thing that they often don't comment on about those 30 tools that are meant to keep kids safe is that a large fraction of, and definitely basically all of the ones that are substantive, launched in a very narrow period of time in the summer of 2021, within weeks before the UK's age-appropriate design code went into effect. So basically, the first country in the world said, oh, no, the floor needs to go up. And because software companies like to decrease complexity, the floor around the world went up at the same time. So the idea that Facebook gets credit for something they were forced to do by a democracy actually acting to protect children is like a little rich to me. But the second thing is, I want to quote Arturo from his testimony in the fall. He said, all these safety interventions lack efficacy measures that are actually about the experience of the kids. So the research that he did while he was at Facebook kind of flipped the script on like how these things are evaluated. So let's take something like the eating disorder information center, information box. They'll show up on search results if you search for things related to eating disorders. Facebook likes to plant that feature and say, we support kids struggling with eating disorders. Like, we trigger this thing. They don't say how often it triggers. They don't say, when we asked people who interacted with it, did it make their eating disorder better or like help with their experience? They never did. When Arturo asked them to do measures like that, they said, we're not interested in things like that, because then they'd have to do something more real. Until, and this is quoting him from the fall, I'm going to keep beating this drum until it happens, until they have to report in their quarterly earnings alongside how much profit they made and what their expenses were, how many kids, how many 13 to 15-year-old girls had unwanted sexual advances in the last week. Until they have to report metrics like that, or like how many kids felt like Instagram made their eating disorder worse. Until they have to report metrics like that, we shouldn't expect these problems to actually get better. And I want to take a little, tweak a little bit what Arturo said earlier, which was, he said, we're never going to have as much information about how these platforms work as we do right now. And that is true, and it's not true, because we have the ability to pass laws. I know it feels like we can't, but we do. We actually can do that. And we can pass laws like what the European Union did, or the UK has done recently. Even Australia has some of these powers, though for not as many different kinds of problems, to say, we have the right to ask questions and get answers. Because we got to where we are today because Facebook knew there were no provisions in our telecommunications code that demanded they actually give us real information when we asked for it. And so we can have more information. It's just we're not going to get another surprise like this until we pass laws that let us open the curtains.
Yeah, but again, the value of your revelations is crucial to this whole, process. So there was obviously, thanks to the drama of the hearing, who was there, the work that you did that forced them to be there in the first place, there was a lot of media scrutiny, there was a lot of congressional scrutiny, there was a lot of public scrutiny. So this was not a good look for them at all. It was a very bad PR day, certainly for the heads of the technology companies. In your experience, does bad publicity have an impact on them? Is it going to force meaningful decisions to reduce and try to eliminate the harms that are being suffered by children as a result of these products? And Francis, why don't we go back to you to start?
So one of the things I found humorous, and I was actually quite glad that the senators called them out on this, was, in the weeks leading up to the hearing, multiple of those companies passed things that we don't know the efficacy numbers on them. They could be totally smoke and mirrors, because remember, we don't know if these are marketing messages or real features until we have legal rights to data. Multiple of those companies came out and said, we passed things around eating disorders. We passed things around self-harm. We're not going to make this problem as bad. A lot of things where you look at those features and you say, you weren't doing that already, right? Like if someone posts about, self-harm, you were distributing it before, like you knew you could stop it and you didn't. And the senators made fun of them for that. They said, hey, we noticed you can make things better. You just didn't choose to until your CEOs were going to get called before the Senate. And so one of the things that we've seen over and over again, and this is particularly worse abroad, I tell Americans, we use the cleanest, safest version of Facebook. And they're always like, what? Or of Instagram, any of these products. The companies allocate safety resources not based on need, but rather based on their fear of consequences. And they like to pretend they're not American companies. And this was another thing when the senators called out. They said, you like to pretend that you are above the law, but you are not. You're an American company. And so they do try to, keep up respectability, at least in the United States, because they do fear action. I want to flag one thing though. Right after the hearing, so a number of people have called out, didn't Facebook stock go up 20% in the last week? They'll be like, are there really any consequences? The stock went up 20%. Mark Zuckerberg walked away with X amount, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars more because the stock went up so much. One of the things that I always flag to people is there were 3 key facts that I feel like were not adequately contextualized about the last week. The first is they announced a $50 billion stock buyback. That's equal to 5% of all the publicly traded stock. That's tied for being the largest single buyback they've ever announced before. The last time they had to announce that was right after I came out. Second, they had to announce a dividend for the first time. So tech companies don't like paying dividends. That's the little extra money you get for owning a stock each quarter, because they're like, oh, we know how to manage that money more effectively. We can make it grow more. We don't need to give it back to you. Situation was bad enough that they finally broke the seal on giving out a dividend. And the third thing, and this really wasn't reported, was they increased bonus compensation by 50%. They said, we're going to give all the employees, we're going to take your annual bonus and increase it by 50%. And you can expect this going forward, which shows you how scared they were about retention, right? The idea that people were going to see the truth of these things. And it's one thing to have me come forward and say, she cherry-picked documents, she lied. Oh, and by the way, we're shutting off your access to any of these files so you can't see for yourself. It's one thing to do that, but between Arturo coming forward, between these senators coming forward, between the AGs releasing documents, the fact that they had to start paying their employees so much more, enough that it kind of washes out all the efficiency they got from firing people, shows you how scared they are. So I do think hearings like this have serious consequences for the company, and that they're letting us know through their actions, maybe not through their words, that they see that the tide is turning.
So Arturo, just a quick response from you, because again, the question is, does bad publicity, is it going to motivate them this time? Because this was pretty bad. I mean, not as bad as when Francis's first batch of documents of Wall Street Journal story came out, but this was bad. Do you think it's going to make a difference?
I think my hope from all of this publicity and from the questions from the senator and these conversations is that it spurs every parent and anybody who's in a position to legislate, sue, or whatever tool is at their disposal into action. Because I think, as Francis so kindly said, right, until we have transparency on the amount of teens that saw self-harm content in the last 7 days, right? 8.4% last 7 days, right? You just think about that, and then think about kids who take their own life after looking at that. If you think about all of the harms, right, that came out as part of both AG's work and Francis and my work, it paints a culture that is not as incentivized as it needs to be to protect the people they serve, right? And that should be the bar. The bar is like, I'm going to protect kids. I'm going to measure how well they're supported when they experience bullying. I'm going to reduce the likelihood that they'll get exposed to hate, for example, is like 1 in 4 number, like 25% last 7 days. And so until that starts changing, then we will see meaningful improvement on their part. In the meantime, they will continue like announcing a tool here, doing things there, locking down information internally so even their own employees don't have access to it. When I was leaving the company, and this is right after Francis, I wrote a note for the entire company saying, hey, here's the number of teens that get unwanted advances. Here's how easy it would be to make it better. And it was kind of very grounded and kind of assuming that they would act on it. And PR and legal made me redact that note to turn it into a hypothetical and take
Oh,
all the
wow.
notes out.
Mm.
Which tells you again sort of about the culture of a company that used to pride itself on transparency to employees and engagement and agency to make things better. And so I do believe that I hope that all of these things, from a press perspective, spur to get lawmakers and AGs and everybody else into the action that they're doing, because the company will not change enough. These companies will not change enough on their own.
So, boy, that's kind of chilling. Um, so you saw Mark Zuckerberg, as we all did, turn to the parents of these children who had died or suffered tremendous harm as a result of their products and apologize. It was quite a dramatic moment, and I think it looked very sincere on his part. Do you think that his own thinking about this, based on what you saw at the hearing, is changing, and this is becoming more of an urgent priority for him personally, or not? Because what have you seen in terms of warnings that have gone to him about harm to children in the past? And we'll start with you, Francis.
I think one of the interesting questions to ask is, how old are Mark's kids, right? Usually I would say let's not discuss the children of public officials because, family is important. I believe there's barriers are good things. But the fact that Mark Zuckerberg's kids are still just a little too young to use Instagram, I think it's one of these things where I think when his kids get just a smidge older, when their friends start being on Instagram in large numbers, when they start asking them if they can be on Instagram, like I think a lot of it will be impossible for him to maintain the level of detachment that he exhibited in this hearing. So Senator Butler of California, and I want to acknowledge here, there was a little bit of a he said, she said during the hearing. So she claimed that when she talked to Mark Zuckerberg the night before the hearing, that he said he had never met a parent of a child who had died because of his products. And now he's walking out in front of 100 bereaved parents. I one of the things that I was really unfortunate about the fact that the cameras didn't know he was going to stand up or that he was going to be asked to apologize is most of the film coverage of it, I think, was really inadequate, right? That I took some on my phone, a couple other people were close by, I took some on their phones, but most of the coverage that was in the news didn't show how scared he looked, right?
Mm.
Meeting a parent who has lost a child to social media is a really emotionally intense experience. Like there's a saying, if you lose your wife, you're a widower, right? If you lose your husband, you're a widow. Like we don't have a word for a parent that loses a child because it is so devastating. And now he's forced to see the pain and anger on those people's faces. And so I can't imagine that he's going to go away from that unchanged, at least a little. But the question is whether or not he continues to hold the stat that he read at the beginning, which was he said, at the population level, there's not evidence that social media is harmful. And the thing that I found very misleading about that statistic, and it's a classic example of Facebook dancing with data, where like if we can't collect the data ourselves, we can't put an objective lens on it, is that 4 out of 5 kids are probably okay on social media. I won't say they're good, but even his own lieutenant, Antigone Davis, said 4 out of 5 kids are fine on social media. That means 1 out of 5 is not fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you care about reducing the damage to the kids who are being hurt? Or do you view your work as, well, we add so much good to the world, it's okay if we break a few eggs to make that omelet? And now he's actually confronted the consequences of those mistakes. And so I can hope that he makes different decisions going forward.
How about you, Arturo? Do you think that that he was changed, that he felt changed, that he looked changed, and did he need to change based on your interactions with him?
Yeah, I think it needs to change. I think that actions are really what define us, right? And what he said that day is what he's been saying for the longest time. And it was very striking to me when presented with some of the statistics of harm that were in my email to him. The first place he went to was, oh, but that study had some stuff that talked about some good, which, just to be really accurate, that study, which was published by New Mexico AG, has nothing in it that really paints a positive picture. And I'm somebody who actually genuinely
Mm.
believes in the good of social media that it can have. It's just that it's not because I'm really nice to you sometimes that I get to beat you sometimes. I mean, it's really, you don't get to do math on like, because I do some good, I get to abuse you, which is what's happening, right? And so I think that I sat down with probably 10 or 15 of the parents and asked them about what happened. And in understanding each of the issues that they have to deal with, I found that they were all exceptionally reasonable and thoughtful. And what everybody was asking for was stuff that was eminently doable and preventable. So, can we make it so that when you start typing Xanax on Instagram, you don't autocomplete results for drug dealers, right? That's one of the things that came out.
Right.
I know it's really it's once you get into the substance and specific of these things, can you make it such
Sorry,
that
I'm
like
sorry.
the parent, the child of the choking challenge, can you make it so that when the parent searches for it, they still can't find it, like 20 or 30 instances of that a week by doing kind of variations on web searchers? And these are all things that these companies have the most sophisticated infrastructure in the world to prevent. And they could make all the difference in the world if they focused on that. So if Mark wants to change, which I believe if he changed, he would do so much good in the world. The first step is to have him or one of his lieutenants sit down with the parents and be like, help me understand what happened to your child so that we can make it better, right? These are all very workable issues. I think that one of the things that gets lost sometimes is this freedom of speech. No, it isn't. It's about like they have a million things they can recommend. It's about what you recommend a 13-year-old, right? And if it turns out that in what you're recommending a 13-year-old, like 1 in 10 or 1 in 8 see something that has to do with self-harm in the last 7 days, well, you can probably make that a lot better, right? And by the way, all of these services are not equal that way. There's places where you can't get awful misogynistic porn recommended back to back if you're a teenager, right? And it's crazy that I have to say these sentences, but that's the world that we live in without transparency and without Mark making a commitment to well-being, right? Which is nobody's investing in. He's investing in stopping spam and like all these things. But when asked, will you invest in well-being? He said no, right? And that's where the money needs to go.
One of the things Meta has been doing very aggressively is pushing the notion that parents should be given control over what their children can buy on the App Store. So, I mean, you see the ads all over the place. It's one of their top talking points. Is that going to? So that means, just for the audience, I'm sure you all know this. That means you can't download Instagram, for example. There's a bunch of apps that you can't download. Is that the right approach, do you think? Would that actually make a difference to the kinds of harms that both of you have pointed out? Why don't we start with you again, Arturo?
Um, I think it's a distraction. Because ultimately it's like having a parent sit down a conversation and being like, okay, Alice or Pat or whatever the kid's name is, I'm about to give you something where you will get sexually harassed, you will get bullied and harassed, so you're gonna feeling alone, you'll be exposed to pornography and other content. And Instagram is not willing to do the work to make it a safe environment for you. So they're pushing the responsibility onto me to manage your downloads, right? And not only that, but are they not willing to do the responsibility to provide a safe environment for a kid? They want to push it up to the app stores. They want to push it up to like other areas, right? Ultimately, each of these companies has a responsibility, like a moral and just human responsibility to create a safe environment for a 13-year-old. And such that we parents, right? Every parent that I spoke to that day, two of the parents whose kids died because of challenges had like their kids had the phones less than an hour a day. They wouldn't have it in bed. They had like top tier parental engagement and practices. like the kids who died of drugs, again, talk to about their engagement with their kids, really like as good as any parent I think can hope to be. And so I think for Meta to say, well, it's all about the parental center is a disavowing of a responsibility that they have to create a safe environment for a 13-year-old, which, you know, if you're going to be doing stuff for them, that's what you need to do.
How about you, Francis? I mean, just in
I
terms
think it's,
of App Store thing, and is that going to
yeah.
work?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's important to look at both when they suggested that intervention and the words they used to suggest it. So for context for our viewers, because I'm sure you don't obsessively read the press releases coming out of Meta as much as I do. Thank God you don't need to. Is, you know, it came out less than 2 weeks after the AGs sued Meta. You know, and if you look at the wording, so there's a big box at the top of that blog post where they announced it. It's had 3 core takeaways. Now, one of the core takeaways was that this law was really needed because we need a level playing field. And what I found so interesting about that wording was, how is the playing field not level today? Right? Like, I think part of why they're pushing for this law is, you know, if you know, you're going to think of what might the AGs be asking them. If Facebook thinks we need a law that restricts access to these apps for under 16-year-olds, you know, maybe there's a future where Meta doesn't get to have access to those under 16-year-olds. So they're like, I want to make sure that I'm not the only one who has to play that way. So the earnestness of this intervention, I question a great deal. And I do get that it seems obvious, like it seems, you know, intuitive. It's like parents should have more rights. But when we frame these things as just, oh, the parent can magically make them better, beyond the fact that as Arturo pointed out, a lot of these parents were doing the right things, right? Parents who aren't doing all the right things, they often don't become activists about their child staff, right? It's the parents that tried to do everything and they still lost their child that go on and fight for them as hard. But the second thing is, there's no guarantee there that the products will be less addictive. It doesn't mean we have any ability to validate the security. Like when those parents are trying to decide, should I let my kid on this app or this app? If we don't have the right to real information, you know, food labels effectively, ingredient labels for these services, we're just left comparing marketing messages. And so parents can have those rights, but if there's no feedback cycle, no incentives to encourage those apps to get better, if there's no real information so that the free market can actually have competition and choice, you know, it's not going to give a lot. I'm going to give one last thing. The last reason why I really hate framing these things in terms of just parent responsibility is one of the comments that I've gotten from multiple parents, and it chills me like every single time. They say it to me is, you changed my life when you came forward, because up until then, I blamed myself for my child's death. And there is no pain as horrible as holding in your heart for the rest of your life that your teenager died because you thought it was your fault. And so I refuse to let those scales be balanced where, you know, on one side you have tech companies with hundreds or thousands of employees specifically there to make sure these products are as addictive as possible, grow as fast as possible, up against a single parent trying to protect their kid.
Yeah, wow, that's a really powerful point. So, Arturo, you made a number of very sophisticated, knowledgeable recommendations. You made these findings, you presented, you know, irrefutable evidence and so forth. So a couple of things. Would the products today be safer if they had followed your fairly simple recommendations of, because again, just for the audience, we're talking about the design and operation of these platforms. We're not talking about, you know, the content that might be, you know, offered that's political back and forth. That's not at all what this debate is about. It is about the tech companies' power to make changes in the design and the operation, which is certainly one of the things that Arturo was talking about. So would the products have been safer had they followed your advice? And why didn't they?
Yes, so one of the changes that I've been talking about is that, you know, a lot of unwanted advances in harassment, again, by their own data, happens over instant messaging, right? I think in one of the AGs, we're talking about like 100,000 kids a day, something like that. And in the own work that we did, like 1 in 8 in the last 7 days. And so the suggestion was, can you just have something in messages that says, oh, help me, this is not for me. Oh, how come? It's making me uncomfortable. It's a little gross. They're being annoying, and you can design these products so that teens want to use them. We spent years doing that, and you kind of ask them kind of how they talk about issues so they have something. And the goal of the feature would be if somebody sends you a conversation, starts a conversation and it's being nice, and then it takes a turn that makes you uncomfortable, to be able to say like, no, that's not for me. And in the process of doing so, create information that you can use to then find predators and people who are behaving inappropriately in the network. So you need a button and a counter. You don't need to review the content because what matters is it's made me uncomfortable. It's directional, so it's like somebody coming into your house and telling you something that makes you super uncomfortable. You know that really matters. This is kind of one of the recommendations that I make that would be straightforward. And had they done that, like my daughter, right, and all of her friends in school, and every like person that I've talked to for a certain age would have something that would help them if it happened. And you can use it to make the platform safer. And I think, and again, this is actually going to be the first time I say this out loud this way, because the question I've always gotten is why? And I've always gone like, I don't know. And I think I finally realized this last 3 or 4 days, just that they don't want to know.
Mm.
That they don't want to know
Yep.
that the kid got an unwanted advance, so they don't have a responsibility to make it better, but they are enabling it, facilitating it for every child that's been groomed, for every child that has a peer that thinks it's okay to send them as deeply sexualized, inappropriate message, which normalizes sexual harassment in a generation of teens, right? And I think that they just don't want to know, because if they did know, they would have to act on it. And so then the measures that they announce to make things better, they're not based on data in the way everything else in that company is based on data. There's not a feature or a goal or anything that that company doesn't do that's not based on like, oh, let's measure how well that worked, right? And if they, I do believe, right, if Mark with earnings had to say, yeah, this is the number of teens that got unwanted advances in the last quarter on Instagram, that number would go down so fast, right? But without that transparency, he gets to announce that, yeah, we're going to make it better because we're going to add some friction here that for some part of the population. And by the way, most of those they've actually rolled back. The things they announced as a result of France, they're actually like got turned into settings, or some of them didn't get followed through. The body image stuff that France did such a wonderful job of bringing a spotlight on. They discussed features internally that would deal with that and make it better. And when Instagram leadership got to review those, they killed the features and they haven't gone back to working on like body image issues for girls, right? And so I wish it wasn't necessary to use the stronger language on this, but I do think that's why it's so urgent for the world to act, because they know this stuff is harmful and there's simple things that they could do, but they're not doing them, and so they have to be compelled to do so.
Francis?
To build on what Arturo just said, when he described that scenario, so you have a huge fraction of these harmful experiences happen one-on-one in direct messages. The stuff that he's describing could be done even in an encrypted context. So one of the things that has happened over the last few years, and we have to talk about it because the companies have done it, like Arturo said, so they know less. They can say, we didn't know what's happening. It happened in an encrypted chat. There's no way we could have known there was a problem going on. Slightly skewing things and saying, hey, let's make it really easy where if a kid is talking to an adult and maybe that adult and them aren't very close on the graph, one, should they be talking to each other? Should it be easier for them to get in touch with each other? That's not an end-to-end encrypted issue. But two, if you have systems where you say, let's actually empower that child within that chat, remember, for a lot of these harms, most people are good people, right? Most people do not send sexual images. Most people do not bully, even kids. Most kids don't bully. But a few kids, a few adults do bad behaviors over and over and over again. And we see this in other harms in the real world. Being able to have any data where we say, we're listening, we hear you. Now we're watching a little closer. Very rapidly, you can drive these numbers, maybe not down to zero, but you can reduce them by 95, 99%. You can still respect people's privacy. And so I think the issue here is, we talked about earlier about does Mark care? I think Mark carries an incredibly, incredibly big burden, which is these products are his identity. You know, his entire adult life, since he was 19 years old, he's been the CEO of Facebook/Meta. And to be able to acknowledge that harm is happening when that is your identity, the idea that something that is you is hurting people, that's a really hard thing to carry. It's much easier to say, I add so much more good than the bad. And so when we open the curtain and we say, sometimes in order to change, we need external accountability. You know, we need incentives, we need people to walk beside us. Sometimes we need people to just give us different ideas, right? Because right now there's a very closed loop around Mark inside of Meta. You know, the people who get to be near him, who get to talk to him, reinforce that idea that he is adding good to the world, and that, you know, a few broken eggs, you know, omelets are delicious. Progress has a cost. And, you know, we need to give Meta, TikTok, Snap the gift of having an accountability buddy, because the employees working in those companies are going to be happier because they're going to finally have incentives that let them, you know, do more good for the world. Probably the companies will be more successful in the long term. I think more people would use Facebook certainly today if they hadn't hyper optimized for the short term bottom line over the last 10 years. They might be a little bit smaller, but it'd be a lot more pleasant place to hang out. And there'd probably be a lot more people there.
So I'm just going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll get to the Q&A, because I think we actually have quite a few questions here. But Arturo, you have been an advisor to the 43 attorneys general who have filed suit against Meta because of the harms that are taking place against children. One of the central points of these lawsuits is the argument that the products themselves, by their design, as we were discussing, are unsafe. If you can tell us in layman's terms, you know, reasonably succinctly, why are the products themselves dangerous? What is it about the design? I mean, we've certainly seen the reporting that they have encouraged people, they get more engagement if people are angry. So we know that that is something that's been discovered, is that the angry reaction gets more engagement, gets more eyeballs, gets more advertising, et cetera. But what is it about the design that makes them dangerous for kids?
Yeah. Let me do a quick correction, which is I was a witness for the AGs, and so
Oh, okay.
it's important for me to say that when that comes up. Let me start with a very concrete example, which is Mark said during the hearing, we don't allow 13-year-olds on the site. That's actually not true. They have a policy that says they shouldn't be there, but they totally allow them on. And in doing some testing, right, in content that got recommended to a 13-year-old account on Instagram, a 13-year-old girl with all the defaults, one of the reels that got recommended was of a probably 8 or 9-year-old girl lip syncing to a song about something very sexual and inappropriate, right? And I'm not going to repeat it here, just being mindful of the audience, but it's like really bad. And when you go look at that girl's Instagram page, you'll find that most of her reels are innocent, but the one where she makes a sexual lip sync, based on a feature that Instagram provided her, which is like use this trying to do that, had 150,000 views.
Mm.
So how many things are wrong with that? They're allowing under 13s to get on there, right? And it's impossible to report them. Incentivize them to create public content that is debasing to themselves, and then teaching everybody who sees that if you want to get ahead in an online world, what you have to do is you have to like sexualize yourself if you're a woman, and there's other variations on that, right? And so when you look at the incentive structures around the product, because they've unchecked engagement, how much time people spend in the product, how much they click on things, because they haven't invested in the harms that come from that. It's like a car with no safety features, right? It's a car where you're like sitting, there's just like the base of the car, you're sitting in it, you're going 150 miles an hour, there's no seat belt. And then the people around you, right, are both intentionally and unintentionally just throwing harmful things your way. And so I think that the fact that they don't really engage in the conversation of like, what is a healthy amount of usage? What is the role that we play in teens' lives? Sort of measuring that, like, how are you feeling today? Right? I feel like really bad because I spent 2 hours on there. The fact that, you know, 1 in 5 kids saw hate, like, And what do I mean by hate? Have you seen anyone discriminating against people on Instagram because their gender, religion, race, sexual orientation, or another part of their identity? 1 in 4 in the last 7 days, right? And so you have a product that could be a safe environment for children, but they've chosen to not address addiction, which is an issue that every parent struggles with when you see their kids relating to that. They've not addressed kind of
Social
incentivizing
media.
kids to be
Yeah.
safer. Social media. Yeah,
Yeah.
social media has not addressed incentivizing kids to make it safer. And they're not addressing like harmful behavior, because if you go and you make fun of a kid, if you're bullying them, chances are that that post is going to get more distribution because of the likes and comments on it than it is to like lead to a good resolution that makes the kid feel protected. So there's just so many ways for a kid to be substantially hurt for the rest of their lives in the product as it stands today. And the most tragic part about this is it doesn't need to be that way, right? If they had good answers for each of these harms, if they had an earnest conversation about addiction and the role it plays in kids' life, if it looked like, yeah, body image issues, they are a part of society, but we are facilitating something and we want to change the role that we play within that. But these are all things that they could do, but they choose not to do. Until they start choosing to address the harms that they facilitate, enable, promote, and distribute, it's not a safe space for a 13-year-old. Like, I really wish it were, but it just isn't.
So Francis, I'm going to take the last question. You can incorporate anything you wanted to add to what Arturo said, for both of you. And that really is, to sum up the aftermath of the hearing, and all the hearings and all the work that's been done up to this point. What do you think are the most important next steps? And what do you expect to happen?
So a friend of mine was at from issue 1, also attended the hearing, and he told me that 9 separate pieces of legislation were mentioned over the course of the hearing. People advocating, for this issue or more broad ones like COSA, which probably has the most bipartisan sponsors at this point. And I think one of the key things we need to be careful on is the perfect is the enemy of the good. One of the things one of the senators called out was there are a lot of people who are saying, I support this, except for this one thing, and this question of, are we building legislation that is flexible and dynamic, right? Is this a thing where we're claiming, if we're making a bill where we can never touch it again, or it's not adaptive and it's not going to change, it's not going to work with technology. If there are things, let's build in processes where we can amend these, or like we can learn as we go. But we need to actually get going. Right? We can talk about perfect bills forever, or we can try to block things until we get the perfect thing, and we're just not going to move. And every single day that we wait to act is a day the kid dies. Like, I would guess in the United States, more than 365 kids die a year from social media, given that some of these individual viral challenges have killed hundreds of kids. That's one of these things where people who don't have a teenager or who aren't deep in these issues, it often comes as a shock to them, because we think of these as innocuous, silly places. At least one child dies every day. Every day that we waste, which parent do you want to apologize to? It's like the classic thing, no one wants to be the last soldier who dies in a war. The second thing, though, is we need to make sure that we believe that change can happen, right? We need to be, there's a lot of former tech employees, there's even current tech employees who could be helping paint a richer picture of what's possible. And I think Arturo has done a really good job at this, of coming out there and saying, these are not binary issues. This is not, the platforms have tried very, very hard. Big tech has tried very hard to frame these solutions as, it's always content moderation, or, if you want safety, you have to give up freedom of speech. A lot of the things that Arturo is talking about are not about content. They're about behavior, or they're about patterns of behavior. They're about algorithms and the choices. For example, should you complete Xanax drug dealer when you search for Xanax? These are editorial choices. But if you're choosing to not invest in safety systems, like if you're choosing to, if you printed in a newspaper an ad for, or like an editorial, like, here's how you find a drug dealer, and people did that and died, newspapers get sued, right? The First Amendment does not support these things forever. And so we need to understand that there's lots and lots of tools available. And we have been told by the platforms the only tool we have is content moderation. So continue to build the knowledge base, continue to document. And, if you're a tech employee, you can keep helping push for good because the public needs you and they need your knowledge.
So Arturo, I was going to let you answer that, but maybe you can work your answer into the next questions because we want to give the audience some time to answer the questions. We've got several questions in the Q&A here. So Willa, if you wouldn't mind taking it away. I just wanted to say you guys are an amazing pair because you complement each other so well. So we really learned a lot here. But anyway, go ahead, Willa.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I want to take this time to read a few questions from our audience. We may not get to all of them, but I'm sure our panelists would be happy to answer any questions that go unanswered today. So our first question is from Leo, and he asks, is there a moderately comprehensive metric externally measured that can be used to assess a platform's current harm tolerance? And I can let Frances take that one first.
So currently there's no external data that I think adequately reflects any of these platforms' current level of safety. One of the things that we've seen from the work of, say, the Australian e-safety minister, who was the first regulator anywhere in the world last fall when they published for the first time, or they gathered for the first time. I don't know if they published it externally. I think they summarized it and published it. They summarized a few metrics around child exploitative imagery, but that's about it that's come out so far that's actually independently auditable. One of the things that's a little complicated about having like a single metric that might summarize these things is, the number of kids impacted by each of these harms, say bullying versus an eating disorder versus hate speech versus being approached by a predator. Those are all different size populations. And if we were to make a single metric that represented all these different aspects, we'd have to come in there and make some value choices, which we can do. Saying, one child being approached by a predator is worth this number of kids being bullied. And so it's better, I think, to have a scorecard where we say, instead of having to make judgments on like how you trade these things off, you say, well, let's see where each platform was this quarter on these 10 harms to kids. And next quarter, let's see where they are, compare them. When we have standard scorecards across platforms, then we can start to have parents really have choices. Innovation can start working in a free market environment. Without having objective, independent information, we can't innovate our way out of these problems because there aren't incentives encouraging innovation.
Arturo, I see you nodding very aggressively. What would you like to add to this?
Hell yeah.
Enough said. So our next question comes from our CRSM's own Kristen Bride, and she asks, what do you think of Snapchat's new marketing plan after the hearing that they are not social media, they are Snapchat? And are we likely to see more of this new rebranding without any of the changes that need to happen to actually make the platform safer? Arturo, I'll start with you.
If your marketing department is responding to these issues, you're doing it wrong. I mean, I think that many of the parents I spoke to, like they find the drug dealer on Instagram or Facebook, and then they get kicked over to Snapchat, and that's where they close the deal because people know they can navigate that. So, what I would really love to see is for there to be a commitment from all of these companies that when it comes to sextortion, drug dealing, the things that really have to be eradicated, which is a subcategory of these issues, that they will agree to just chase across all the platforms, all of the connected accounts, so that they become inhospitable to drug dealing and sextortion, which is sort of the case today. So I think that anything that comes from marketing, I just really like. And I just say one more thing, which is like to the way they said about Frances about like cherry picking all these other things. That's what they do. They're cherry picking their own presentations, their own statistics, and their own numbers in order to present a picture that is misleading to parents and to us about what we hand our kids when they're spending time on these services.
I worked with some researchers just today who are working on building simulations of how to assess different ways of managing harm. This is like, if you handle content moderation this way, if you handle how like behavioral filtering, like all these different ways that you might approach these problems, how can you actually simulate the impacts and be able to compare things? And they asked me like, how important is it for us to do different platforms? And what I said to them was, I would probably bucket them. So given that we've moved away from kind of follower-based social media, that's like what Facebook was in 2008, back when it was really your family, it was really your friends. And we've moved more towards like what I'd call like a TikTok-y world. It's all about broadcast social media. It's a pure algorithm that tells you what you should focus on. The place where that personal social media migrated to, so that's kind of like Facebook of 2008, is onto direct messaging, right? So I have gotten bashed by Meredith Whitaker before real hard on stage because I said, my social media is Signal, right? I'm on a bunch of group chats. I'm probably on 75 group chats because I live on group chat, all on different topics, everything from doom news, which is like, war, destruction, everything, to I have a cooking chat, right? And all these places have 50 or 100 people. They're all people who either I know or my friends know. Lots of cool content comes into my life. I have places to have conversations with people. If what social media, the social spaces, we'll call them social spaces because then we don't have to call them social media. But if the social places that people are hanging out are direct messaging, things like Snapchat, things like Signal, things like WhatsApp, and recommender systems, things like TikTok, we have to actually deal with the reality of how people are socializing. And so I would totally signal boost what Arturo said, which is if your marketing department is the one framing these issues, it is almost certainly a sign that you should look more closely.
I agree. I think we have time for one more question. And coincidentally, this is a very big question. So do your best to sum it up in 4 minutes. But this question comes from Louisa, and she's curious how optimistic or pessimistic you are that these companies are taking proactive measures to prevent a repeat of January 6th or Stop the Steal. And what can these companies be compelled to do between now and the 2024 election to combat mis and disinformation? Francis, you can take this one first.
I'll go first. Yeah. So I often get a little bit of rage back at me for what I'm about to say, which is, when we look at January 6th, it's important for us to acknowledge what a lot of the rioters thought was happening, right? So when they signed on to Facebook, what they saw was a flood of posts that said your country is being stolen, right? Like they in terms of where their information was coming from and what they were seeing, it looked like it was a thing that was serious enough that they would need to do something like storm the Capitol. How did that happen? We know from the documents that were in the Facebook files that I brought forth in the disclosures that Facebook saw for months going up into the election, like basically even in the weeks before the election, that there were people very intentionally pushing a meme of Stop the Steal, that you need to act. And the way they did that was things like Facebook, if you get invited to a group, they send you content from that group for 30 days. If you put a comment on something saying, I think this is misinformation, they go, oh, you like it, we'll make you a member. And then that content continues to go to you. 0.3% of people who sent out invites, so that's even a tinier fraction, it's probably like 1 in 10,000 people in that group, sent out over 30% of all the invites. That means, maybe 1% of people sent out 85, 90% of the invites. The top person who sent out invites sent out 300,000 invites to Stop the Steal groups. This was not an accident. And right now, we have no evidence that Facebook has changed those policies. When I sign on to Facebook now, because people post so much less often, they're pushing people into groups at very, very aggressive rates. And so we should be demanding that we know what they're doing to make sure that people don't weaponize the platform. Because there's a lot of people who went to jail for the riots who I don't think would have gone to jail if Facebook had actually made sure that people hadn't hijacked the platform by sending out 300,000 invitations.
Arturo, any last thoughts to close us out today?
Yeah, I think if you're a parent watching this, right, in this world of the things that we talk about, then this is in a slightly different domain, but I think so essential. The most important thing that you can do is to know that everything we talked about, your kid is going to run into it inevitably. And it's going to be hard for them to deal with. They might feel alone doing so. And the best thing that you can do today and tomorrow and every possible day is to make it safe for them to tell you anything that happens. and no matter what it is. And like what I told my daughter is like, look, my job is to help you navigate these things, and because they will get exposed to the lowest common denominator, what all of the friends have to deal with online, and that's just kind of the world that we're at right now. So talk to your kids, make it safe for them to bring up anything, talk about unwanted advances in a way that works for your family, talk about these things. Say, you know what, stuff is going to happen. I love you and I'm here for you. And whatever happens.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you, Willa, also. That was really just so much important information for all of us to process, and what a powerful way to close this conversation, Arturo. So thank you both very, very much again for your courage and what you've done and your knowledge and, you know, your efforts to help all the, you know, all the people really in the country who are suffering harms in one way or another from social media. And thanks to the audience, and we'll see you next time.